This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
Let's begin by talking about Bryan's family with renowned author and journalist Howard Blum. So I wanted to start by talking about Bryan Kohberger's family. In your book, which again is just beautifully written, you talk about the fact that Bryan's father, Michael Kohberger, accompanied him to WSU. He actually drove with him out to WSU. And then the second road trip, which is the road trip where they drove back from Pullman, Washington, back to Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. And I thought it was really interesting that Michael chose to accompany Bryan both to and from WSU. And I was just wondering, do you think this was related to any type of ongoing behavior issues with Bryan?
Well, you have to remember Bryan is not a kid. He's not a father taking a kid off to college when they go in August. Bryan at this point is 28 years old. He's going to be a teaching assistant at Washington State University. He's going to be teaching undergraduates. He's a man. And yet the father, who's 68 years old, has to make this trip out there across America with him. It's a tiring trip. And then he has to go to the expense of taking a plane ride back to Pennsylvania. And this is a family where the father has been bankrupt twice. The father was a maintenance man at the local high school where Bryan had attended. The money was short, clearly, and yet he feels concerned enough that he has to be with his son. He has to watch over him. And proof of this is the first thing he does when he gets out to Washington State and he's helping his son carry boxes up to his room on the second floor. And in one of these boxes, interestingly enough, was the Amazon knife that Bryan had ordered before he went out to Washington State. He had ordered last spring before he drove out in August. So one of these boxes enclosed the murder weapon. The father then goes up to one of the neighbors who he sees who helped them move the boxes a little bit. And he said, my son is kind of shy. He has a hard time meeting people. Can you do anything to help him? And the guy's name was Christian Martinez, and I spoke with him a bit. And he felt sorry, a newcomer into town. He didn't know him, so he invites him to a pool party. He goes to this pool party, which is his first time that Bryan Kohberger is in Moscow, Idaho. It's 9 miles away, and that sets in motion arguably a whole lot of events that have a tragic ending. But the father is there trying to help him. On the ride back across country, which is, I structure my book around that ride because to me it seems like something out of a Shakespearean drama. Mm-hmm. Here is the father sitting shoulder to shoulder in a white Hyundai Elantra. The father knows at this point that every policeman in America is looking for a white Hyundai Elantra because it's been, they've sent out a be on the lookout alert for this car. It seems to be suspected that it was in part of the murders. He knows his son lives only 9 miles away, and he knows his son has had a very problematic youth. I mean, Bryan was a heroin addict. He had suffered from visual snow, which was a psychological condition that made him look at the world as if he was seeing it through a cloudy haze. He was a very difficult young man. And according to the reporting I did, as soon as Michael Kohberger, the 68-year-old father, gets out to Washington State to see his son for this ride back across America, he begins to see the familiar signs that his son is in a mood. Bryan has his moods, and this mood is there. So the father knows, well, you tread carefully. You don't want to poke the bear. You want to do anything you can help to pacify him, to calm the situation. But in the course of this trip across America, they're going back together. It's just 2 weeks after the murders. They're stopped not once, but twice by Indiana state troopers on a traffic violation. But all the time, the father is thinking in his mind, is this it? Is my son going to be caught? Are they looking for him? And in the course of this journey, I believe, and my reporting has shown me, that the father, Michael Kohberger, is getting closer and closer and closer to the realization that my son is a monster. And yet, the father can't quite make that leap at this point. It's too large a moment for him to grasp. He can't admit to himself that his son can be a murderer. yet he's all the time suspecting it. This tension going on in this little Hyundai Elantra across America is the stuff of great drama, I believe.
Amazing. Great reporting on your part. So, what do you think this series of phone calls that Bryan Kohberger made on November 13th of 2022 to, you touch on this a little bit, to his parents' family phone, those 3 phone calls that were made that morning, what do you think that was about?
Well, at 2 hours after the murders, at approximately 6 a.m., this is Idaho time, Bryan Kohberger makes a 54-minute phone call to a phone registered to his father. My reporting, as we've told me, that he spoke largely to his mother. What was said on that conversation, who he spoke with, only Bryan Kohberger and the people on the other end know. And we might never get the answer because of this plea deal. That's one of the frustrating things about this entire plea deal. But we have to realize one of the things I've looked into after the settlement, because I have to admit, the settlement took me completely by surprise. I was blindsided. Here, the prosecution had just had 2 rulings in their favor. The judge had thrown out that there were alternate perpetrators involved in the case. He said, you can't bring that in. This is just, in effect, gossip, allegations. You can't use it. And Bryan Kohberger's alibi, that he was out at 4 o'clock in the morning when the murders occurred, looking at a cloudy night, looking at the stars, the judge said, that's not an alibi. And so the defense was in a pretty good situation to win. And Bryan previously had been approached by his team, I was told, to try to cut a deal to save him from the long guns of a firing squad. Because in Idaho, a death penalty case ends in the firing squad starting next June. That law was passed by the state legislature primarily for Bryan Kohberger. This phone call, now the father and the mother, after it's revealed on Dateline had their show where they revealed this first. I was a small cog on that Dateline colossus. I appeared as a talking head, and I did a minor bit of research, but they got that big insight about the phone call. The Kohberger family now knew that this phone call would be brought up by the prosecution. They knew that Michael Kohberger and Marianne Kohberger, the mother, would be asked under oath on the stand what was said. And they knew if they didn't tell the truth, if they lied, well, they could be in legal jeopardy. When this was explained to Bryan, he decided, as it was explained to me, that he didn't feel remorse. That's too rational, too simple a concept, but he felt something akin to remorse, let's say. He did not want to put his parents in legal jeopardy. He'd made their lives hell. So that was one of the reasons why he told his lawyers, go approach the prosecution and see if you can cut a deal. The other reason was that the ride across America, that Christmas ride, which we had already mentioned, that was now going to come up too. And Michael Kohberger would be asked, what was said? What were you thinking? Did you have any suspicions? And they couldn't really do that under oath. And those 2 incidents involving his parents, plus the fact that he could save his own life, that he wouldn't face the firing squad, convinced Bryan Kohberger that it made sense for him to cut a deal with the prosecution. The larger question is, I would suggest, why did the prosecution make this deal? Well, you can say veteran prosecutors always know that every courtroom drama is a roll of the dice. You never know how it's going to turn out. You never know if there's one juror there who will have reasonable doubt in his mind. You'll never be able to convince him. But I think that's too simplistic an explanation. I believe that after all this time, nearly 2.5 years, Bill Thompson, the prosecutor in the case, just had enough of living in this horrid tragedy for 2.5 years. the prospect of a 3-month trial was just too much. He could send Kohberger off to prison for four consecutive terms. The secrets will never be answered, but he would, the prosecutor, I think, made a coolly pragmatic and expedient and I think deeply flawed decision to cut a deal. But that's how it came about. Bill Thompson will be out fishing and we won't have any answers. I also think, looking back in retrospect, I said I was blindsided by this plea deal. But you can see all along that many of the people in power in Idaho, many of the honorable men in Idaho, were willing to allow this situation to just disappear. You look at the beginning. You had Judge John Judge, who had the case originally in Moscow. He was happy to let it go to Boise, and then as soon as it went to Boise, he could have gone with the case to Boise. He could have presided over the case, and he said, "Enough already. I'm retiring." You had Chief Fry, the chief of police, who led the 7-week manhunt. He goes on national television, and he's so filled with emotion that tears are rolling down his cheeks as he describes the man that they've arrested. And yet, not long after that, he retires and he leaves Moscow, and now he's the police chief in a small town in Washington State. You have Judge Hippler himself, who was facing the prospect of a 3-month trial, as he put it. He said this will last 3 months. On his first day in the courtroom, he tells the assembled people in the courtroom, "I could say I'm happy to be here, but why should I begin with a falsehood?" He wanted this to go away too. And then you have, perhaps most dramatically, the officials at the University of Idaho. They bulldozed the murder house. They wanted to blacktop the whole thing, make it all disappear. They think they could demolish it and people would forget about it. I don't think that'll ever happen. I don't think people will ever forget. I think this is a story about victims, but there just happened to be a lack of will, a lack of appetite after nearly 3 frustrating years of this case meandering its way through the courts. People said, enough already. Let's get this over with.
If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It's free and it helps me out a lot. Give this a thumbs up and drop me a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I've been feeling weird, I can't seem to focus good enough. Nothing's really clear, sometimes it could be a little tough. I just